So what we just did, fellow teachers, is an example of predicting outcomes. But notice that when we predict, it's not only limited to that particular reading comprehension skill. Because when we try to predict, there are still a number of reading comprehension skills that are required for us to do, right? Like, for example, before we were able to give our prediction, we made inferences. We even noted some details, right? And we even come up with analyzing the cause-effect relationships, right? So therefore, predicting outcome is not a standalone reading comprehension skill. But how do we define predictions? Okay? Predictions are the connecting links between prior knowledge and new information in the book. What does it mean to predict? A while ago, when you were predicting, you made use of your background knowledge, of your prior knowledge, and you married that background knowledge with what you see on the text, with what you see on that picture. So to predict also means that students use their prior knowledge and what they see in the text to be able to set up their expectations as to what is coming and to be able to prepare meaning, okay? Prepare meaning or come up with meanings as provided for in the text. But students also make use of their knowledge of the vocabulary, their concept, text organization, even the students' knowledge about the author styles, isn't it? If the students have been used to reading text prepared by a particular author, they probably get an idea as to how that author developed his stories, right? Now, there is this book entitled, What Teachers Need to Know About Reading and Writing Difficulties. Now, in that book, there is this author, Westwood, who emphasizes that reading comprehension is an active thinking process where the reader intentionally constructs, okay, meaning to form a deeper understanding of the text, okay? And upon extracting, they start also to construct meaning. So therefore, what is indicated in the text and what is stored in the head of our students are equally important, right? So in this process, the role of the teacher is crucial. How do we elicit that prior knowledge of our students? Because if we do not have the power to elicit that prior knowledge, a well-prepared text, a very fresh material, might not be able to serve its purpose for predicting outcomes. It is also said that predicting is a brain-compatible learning. The brain loves predicting, isn't it? The brain loves predicting, particularly when it involves stories or materials which grab our attention and draw our emotion, right? It's common even in ordinary conversation. We love to predict. We wouldn't even allow the person we are speaking with to finish what he or she is telling us. We would predict. We get so excited. And that is a normal process that happens in our brain. It is this element of guessing, right? It is this element of guessing that creates novelty and engages the reader. Well, you know it. You know, the brain seeks meaning by organizing words, forming patterns, okay? We would naturally look for patterns and we would want to, form or find those missing pieces. Notice that when students survey narrative texts, strategic readers would look at the cover of the book, the illustration. We would look at the titles of the chapters, even the pictures, captions, even the italicized and bold-faced words. The first few paragraphs, we read them. This aids us in trying to see if the book will get will have that emotional hook. Okay? Also, when students read expository texts, right? When students read expository texts, they still look at the chapter headings, they still try to see if the book is filled with text and if there are no illustrations. And sad to say, when students don't see illustrations, oftentimes, exactly ma'am, they don't get motivated to read. So the challenge remains in us teachers. How do we get our students become motivated and, sustain that interest in reading even if they don't see illustrations in the text? Okay? So therefore, it is not enough that we allow our students to guess. It is also essential that they are able to prove their predictions, right? They are able to prove their guesses, that there has to be a valid support to their guess. We cannot allow illogical guesses unless otherwise we allow our students to explain, because it all depends upon their prior knowledge. If we do not get the expected prediction, we cannot blame the student. Maybe the student has another prior knowledge. And later on, when I introduce to you this classic yet very effective strategy, you will see how important it is to allow our students to take chances in our classroom. We also say that predicting is brain compatible, even if we are not reading, even if we are just watching movies, isn't it? When we watch movies, sometimes there are fellow watchers who cannot avoid predicting, even up to the extent of interrupting you, right? And that is annoying, isn't it? Oh, there is a spoiler, according to Sir. That is annoying. On the other hand, probably we also have to appreciate that, because that means that they are not passive readers or passive listeners or passive watchers. That means that there is some kind of thinking processes that are, happening in their minds, isn't it? That are happening in their minds. And perhaps we really have to tolerate that among our students. However, despite the fact that predicting is a brain-compatible learning, and a great majority of us love predicting, this is a painful yet inescapable fact that still many of our students remain passive in reading. So readers sometimes struggle because they don't predict what the selection might be about. They don't think about what they already know about a topic. And they don't form images as they read. What they do, according to Beers, is that they open a book, look at words, and begin turning pages. Is that a common scenario in the classroom? Yes, it is. And when we see our students acting this way, we start to question our, effectiveness as teachers, isn't it? We start to question, what will motivate my students to read, to love reading? So it's another challenge for us. What do we do now as teachers? We have to seek the most productive way to support reading comprehension. An effort to challenge students is not only about memorizing, but also questioning, asking them to interpret, to create, to solve problems, to evaluate the material in the teaching-learning process. In other words, we have to explore the students' critical thinking in reading comprehension. And in the long run, be able to teach them about their own thinking. And that is what we call as metacognition. Teaching the students to learn on their own, learning to learn. This is essential type of assessment also. We call it assessment as learning, as opposed to assessment of learning, which is about summative assessments, and as opposed to assessment for learning, okay, which is about formative assessment. And when we talk of assessment as learning, that is allowing our students to develop metacognitive strategies so that on their own, they can learn. That's why we always say we have to develop our students to make them become independent learners. But by asking our students or by teaching our students to become independent learners does not necessarily mean that it becomes our opportunity as teachers to take a rest, isn't it? The more responsibility is upon us when we try to teach our students to think about their own learning. Now, for predicting outcomes, one of the classic yet have been repeatedly proven as an effective instructional strategy is called directed reading thinking activity. Okay? DRTA is a comprehension strategy that guides students in asking questions about a text, making predictions, and then reading to prove or disprove their predictions. DRTA encourages students to be actively engaged in text or with the text or story, enhancing comprehension, and leveraging prior and background knowledge. So based on this definition, DRTA focuses on reading as a thinking process. Directing. Directing involves activating students' background and prior knowledge of a passage by skimming through to reflect on the title, chapter headings, illustrations, and other information. Now, how do we activate this prior knowledge of our students? We cannot just say, I am showing you this picture, you have to activate your prior knowledge and tell me what will happen next. It's not that. The role of the teacher is big, okay? And it involves our ability to throw thought-provoking questions, right? But we are not just limited to asking, what will happen next? What will happen next? Okay? There could be other thought-provoking questions that we can throw to our students in order to push their thinking and to elicit possible responses that might lead them to understanding the text. What could be these questions that might aid them in giving the most plausible predictions? Again, this could be questions that would require them to do close reading. And in doing close reading, students are required to make inferences, note details, identify cause-effect relationship, even distinguish fact from opinion so that they will be able to come up with more logical predictions. Reading. Reading suggests that the teacher creates chunks, okay? The text is divided into sections. There are predetermined breaks in the text or stories. After each predetermined breaks, the teacher asks questions and students give their predictions while they are listening or while they are reading independently or with teacher support. Okay? Thinking. Thinking means that for each section, students evaluate or refine their prediction. Here we have to model how to use supporting statements from the text in order to be able to prove or disprove predictions. So typically, the teacher will read to students the passage, have them do the thinking and the predicting part. These predictions and confirmations will guide the students' understanding of the text. So here is the process. You will notice that the first one is introduce new portion of text. But perhaps prior to introducing new portion of text, the first thing that we have to do is to look for a fresh material, a text or a story that is unfamiliar to students. Otherwise, the purpose of predicting might be defeated. We have to look for a material which we think the students have not yet read. Okay? So we introduce the text, and then we give the first chunk. It might not be the first chunk. It might even be the cover page. It might even be the first illustration. And then we ask our students to predict the title of the text. What could be the text about? What do you think is the text? What type of story will it be? Okay? And then after that, the students read and check for understanding. Okay. In checking for understanding, it is the obligation now of the teachers to be able to clarify probably difficult words, right? What else? It becomes the role of the teacher also to allow students to recall if they have seen that particular illustration of a book. If it is the first chunk, unlock the difficult words. And then we start encouraging predictions. We throw questions, okay? This is our way now of encouraging predictions. In encouraging predictions, we accept all. We accept all. As much as possible, we filter only when we ask our students to give their evidences or proof for predicting. That's why it is in clarifying and in verifying. Okay? In clarifying and verifying, this is where the students refine their prediction. The teacher will probably question the students about the evidences that will back the predictions. Okay? Why they thought so. Okay? That could probably change their mind, which we still have to accept. So therefore, the process of reading, predicting, and then proving or disproving cycle continues until the end of the story. Now, notice that there is a cycle of repetition. And it is this cycle which makes DRTA effective for students with learning disabilities and for some of our students who are struggling readers, right? Struggling readers. Many students with learning disabilities and struggling need repetition within the same content in order to start to gain an understanding. Also, this strategy gives students time for thinking. They are constantly predicting what will happen, justifying and explaining, and then going back to see if the prediction was correct or not, and then trying to fix the prediction. In summary, directed reading thinking activity guides students in asking questions about a text, making predictions, reading to confirm or refute their predictions, encouraging students to be active and thoughtful readers, allow students to ask questions or make predictions using their own words in a non-threatening environment. I think this is very important, fellow teachers, that a non-threatening environment allows our students to feel psychologically safe inside the classroom. Okay? To feel psychologically safe. That it is all right to take chances. It is all right to simply shout their answers during DRTA. That's how we make it, okay? That's how we make DRTA more successful. When we see that everyone is involved and when we see that everyone doesn't have that apprehension to give their answers, okay? Which we always dream of in an English class, in a language class. Because a great majority of our students would refuse to respond to our questions because they are afraid to be laughed at, they are afraid to be humiliated, maybe because their answer is wrong or their grammar is erroneous. All this kind of errors that, prevent them from being free inside the classroom. And it is our responsibility as teachers to allow students to experience success in our classroom. This simple success of being able to share his ideas, this is another important manifestation of DRTA. When implementing a DRTA, fellow teachers, we must remember that it is just a larger part of the instructional framework, which contain essential components. So of course, we still begin our lesson with developing readiness to read the selection, right? And then, the second one now is the DRTA, or if we would like to use it as a strategy for listening, or even as a strategy for watching video, for viewing, then we can call it as DLTA or DVTA, respectively. And then after which, we still proceed with the usual comprehension guide questions. Okay? And then the rereading of the selection for other purposes. Then we still give evaluation and enrichment activity. Okay? So DRTA is just part of the larger instructional framework that we usually do in our classroom.
My aunt will be down presently, Mr. Nuttall. In the meantime, you must try and put up with me.
It is very kind of you to wait with me. Your aunt, Mrs. Sappleton. I'm looking forward to meeting her, I'm sure.
Do you know many of the people around here?
Hardly a soul, I'm afraid. My sister stayed at the rectory 4 years ago, and she's given me some letters of introduction.
Oh.
Oh?
Then you know practically nothing about my aunt?
I know her name and address.
Her great tragedy happened just 3 years ago. That would be after your sister's time.
Her tragedy?
You may wonder why we keep these French doors open on such a cold afternoon.
It is quite warm for the time of year.
Out through those doors, 3 years ago to a day, my aunt's husband and her 2 sons went off for their day's shooting. They never came back. Crossing the moor to their favourite snipe shooting ground, all 3 were engulfed in a treacherous piece of bog. Their bodies were never recovered. That was the awful part of it. No grave, no marker. Poor aunt thinks that they will come back someday, they and the little brown Labrador that was lost with them, and walk in as they used to. She spends hours sitting, waiting, watching through the open doors. She won't allow them to be shut until it's dark outside. Oh, I'm sorry. Do sit down, Mr. Nuttall. That was done shortly before they... Poor dear aunt. She's often told me of how they went out. Her husband with his waterproof coat over his arm, and Ronnie, her eldest son, teasing her. The tea'd better be ready when we return, Mamma, else there'll be hell to pay. Do you know, sometimes, on still, quiet evenings like this, I almost get a feeling that they will all just walk in through those doors.
I'm terribly sorry for keeping you waiting, Miss Nuttall. I hope Vera has been amusing you.
She has been very interesting.
Oh, I hope you don't mind the French doors. My husband and my sons will be home directly from shooting, and they always come in this way. Well, they've been out for snipe in the marshes today, so they'll make a fine mess of my carpets. Typical of you menfolk, isn't it?
They're calling it nervous exhaustion. It's in the family. As you know, my sister...
Is the tea ready? Make sure it is. I seem to remember your sister. Yes. Sweet lady. Yes, your sort don't come down so much anymore. I hope your stay will be peaceful. Are you a shooting man, Mr. Nuttall? Milk?
Just a little.
It hasn't been the same these last few years. The rain and the mud, you see. It's made an infernal quagmire at the marshes.
The doctors agree in ordering me complete rest. An absence of mental excitement, and anything in the nature of violent physical exercise. On the subject of diet, though, they're not in such agreement.
No. Oh, here they are at last. And don't they look as if they're muddy up to the eyes?
Dear, but most of it's dry. They'll need to get used to it if we go to war.
Oh, please, let's not talk about that.
We'll be home by Christmas, you'll see. Check.
Who was that who bolted out as we came up?
The most extraordinary man, a Mr. Nuttall. He talked about nothing but his illnesses, and then he dashed off without a word of goodbye or apology when you came in.
I expect it was the Labrador. He told me he had a horror of dogs. He was once hunted into a cemetery on the banks of the Ganges by a pack of pariah dogs, and had to spend the night in a newly dug grave with the creatures snarling and grinning and foaming just above him. Enough to make anyone lose their nerve, I dare say.